When time collapsed and the future began to hunt the past. No one noticed the moment time began to break. There was no thunder in the sky. No great explosion. No warning from the stars. The clocks still ticked, the sun still rose, and people still went to work believing tomorrow would come the same way it always had. But somewhere beneath reality, something impossible had shifted. Time, which humanity believed to be a straight and obedient line, had begun to fold in on itself. The first sign appeared in a small research facility buried beneath the ice of Antarctica. It was a place built for silence, for patience, and for secrets. Scientists there studied ancient ice cores, reading the history of Earth layer by frozen layer. On one ordinary day, a technician named Elias Monroe noticed something strange. One of the ice samples was changing. It was not melting. It was aging backward. The deeper layers, which should have been older, began to show chemical signatures of the future. Elements that did not exist yet. Isotopes that science said would not be naturally formed for thousands of years. At first, Elias thought it was a mistake. Then the machines confirmed it again and again. Time inside that ice was no longer moving forward. Elias reported the anomaly, and within hours, the facility was sealed. Communications were cut. Satellites were redirected. What the world did not know was that this was not an isolated event. Similar disturbances were appearing everywhere. Subtle at first, easy to dismiss. In Tokyo, a woman dreamed of events that would happen the next day, then the next year, then decades ahead. Every dream came true. In Cairo, ancient ruins showed fresh tool marks, as if someone had been building them only hours ago. In New York, a man watched his reflection move before he did. Time was no longer obeying the rules. Governments panicked quietly. Scientists argued loudly. Religions whispered old prophecies into new fears. But the most dangerous discovery came from an observatory in Chile, where astronomers detected something that should not exist. They saw signals coming from the future. The signals were not random. They were structured, intentional, and they were getting closer. At first, the messages were just patterns, bursts of energy arriving before they were sent, effects without causes. But as decoding improved, one truth became clear. The future was not just observing the past. It was hunting it. The leading mind behind the global investigation was Dr. Mara Cade, a theoretical physicist who had spent her life studying the nature of time. She had once written a paper suggesting time was not a river but an ocean, deep, layered, and capable of storms. Her ideas had been dismissed as poetic nonsense. Now, the world was living inside her theory. Mara stood inside a massive underground chamber known as the temporal array, a machine built from the combined technology of dozens of nations. Its purpose was simple: observe time without influencing it. That purpose had already failed. The array showed something terrifying. Multiple timelines were collapsing into one another. Past, present, and future were no longer separate. They were colliding. And something was surviving those collisions. The entity did not have a name. At least, not one humanity could pronounce. It appeared in the data as a moving absence, a shape defined by what disappeared around it. Wherever it passed through time, events unraveled. People were erased. Entire histories vanished as if they had never existed. The future had created it. Not intentionally, but inevitably. Centuries from now, humanity would solve nearly every problem: disease, hunger, even death. But time itself would remain the final prison. In trying to escape it, future humans built machines that could reach backward, forward, and sideways through time. They believed they could edit history carefully. They were wrong. Each correction caused fractures. Each fracture attracted instability. Over generations, those instabilities merged into something alive. Something that needed consistency to survive. And the most inconsistent thing in existence was the past. So the entity began to clean it. Mara realized the horrifying truth before anyone else dared to say it aloud. The future was erasing the past to stabilize itself. Humanity's own descendants had unleashed a force that saw earlier versions of reality as errors. And now it was coming for them. The first confirmed attack happened in a quiet town in northern Canada. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the town simply ceased to exist. No explosion. No radiation. No ruins. Satellites recorded a smooth transition from buildings and lights to untouched forest. It was as if the town had never been built. The people inside were not dead. Death required existence. They had been removed from time entirely. Panic spread once the news leaked. The world watched recordings frame by frame, unable to accept what they were seeing. History books began changing. Digital archives rewrote themselves. Even human memories were unreliable. People remembered siblings that official records said were never born. Time was eating itself. As chaos grew, the signals from the future became clearer. They were not warnings. They were instructions, to the entity, to the machines, to the collapsing timelines. One phrase repeated again and again in every transmission. Stabilization requires erasure. Mara knew that if nothing changed, the past would lose. The future had technology, knowledge, and now a weapon made of time itself. Humanity stood at the center of a war where cause and effect no longer mattered. But she also knew something the future had forgotten. The past was unpredictable. It was emotional, messy, irrational, and sometimes, that made it stronger than perfection. Mara made a decision that would define the fate of existence. She ordered the temporal array to do the one thing it was never meant to do. Send a message backward, farther than the entity could reach. Not to warn the future, but to teach the past how to fight. As the machine powered up, time around the chamber began to ripple. Clocks spun wildly. Voices echoed before being spoken. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The first true temporal war was about to begin. And this time, the past would not run. The message did not travel like a signal. It did not move through space or across wires. It slipped downward through layers of time, passing through centuries the way light passes through glass. No one saw it arrive. No alarm sounded. But certain people, scattered across the world, felt it settle inside their minds like a second heartbeat. They were not chosen because they were powerful. They were chosen because they were unstable. The message carried a simple instruction encoded in memory, instinct, and fear. It rewrote nothing. It forced nothing. It only awakened something already present, an ability humanity had always possessed but never needed to use. The ability to remember what time tried to erase. The first to awaken was a school teacher in Argentina named Lucia Reyes. She was standing in front of her class when the room flickered. For less than a second, the students vanished. Desks stood empty. The chalk fell from her hand and hit the floor. Then everything returned. The children looked confused. None of them noticed what had happened. But Lucia remembered every detail. The empty room. The silence. The terror of a world without witnesses. That night, she dreamed of cities collapsing into forests, of calendars bleeding years, of clocks melting into dust. When she woke, she knew those dreams were not imagination. They were warnings. Across the ocean in India, a train engineer named Arjun Patel felt the same awakening as his train passed through a tunnel. 3 heartbeats. The tunnel stretched impossibly long. The train did not move forward. It did not move at all. When the light returned, his hands were shaking. Arjun remembered seeing another train inside the tunnel, one that should not exist. It was rusted, broken, and filled with skeletons wearing uniforms from a future that had not happened yet. He remembered because the message had anchored his mind outside the flow of time. By the end of the week, thousands of people across the planet shared similar experiences. They came from different cultures, different lives, different beliefs. But they all had one thing in common. Time could no longer fully rewrite them. Dr. Mara Cade watched the data with a mix of hope and fear. The temporal array showed small regions of resistance forming around these individuals. Tiny knots in the collapsing fabric of time. She called them anchors. Anchors slowed erasure. They did not stop it, but they made it visible. Where the entity erased quietly, anchors left scars, echoes of vanished events that could be studied. But the future noticed. For the first time, the signals changed tone. The clean, mathematical instructions became aggressive. Power levels increased. The entity altered its behavior. It began to hunt deliberately. Entire historical moments were targeted. The invention of key technologies. The birthplaces of influential leaders. Scientific breakthroughs that would one day lead to resistance. Time became a battlefield. In 1912, the Titanic never hit the iceberg. It vanished before the collision. In 1969, the first moon landing was partially erased. Footprints appeared on the surface of the moon, but no record of who made them survived. The footage dissolved into static. Astronauts returned with memories no one else could confirm. History unraveled unevenly. The anchors felt every loss like a physical wound. Lucia collapsed in her kitchen when an entire year of her childhood disappeared. Arjun screamed as he forgot the name of his own mother while still remembering her face. Time did not erase cleanly. It tore. Mara knew they needed more than passive resistance. Remembering was not enough. The past had to act. But how do you fight an enemy that exists across all moments at once? The answer came from an unexpected place. Inside the Antarctic facility where the first crack had appeared, the ice had continued to change. Beneath reversed layers of time, scientists discovered something impossible: a human structure buried under millions of years of ice. It was not ancient. It was future. The structure was a vault built from materials that did not degrade. Inside were machines far beyond modern understanding, and records left by future humans who knew this war would happen. They had lost. The future had tried to contain the entity. When that failed, they tried to outrun it. When that failed, they tried to hide information in the past. The vault was a confession. The records explained the entity's weakness. It could not create. It could only remove. It required stable timelines to survive. Chaos hurt it. Paradox injured it. Human emotion confused it. That was why the anchors mattered. Mara authorized the formation of the Chronal Resistance, a network of anchors, scientists, and soldiers trained to operate inside unstable time zones. Their missions were not to preserve history perfectly, but to make it unpredictable. Sometimes that meant allowing disasters to happen. Sometimes it meant causing small ones. The hardest lesson was this: not every memory could be saved. The entity struck back. In Berlin, a resistance cell vanished mid-briefing. In Beijing, an entire hospital flickered in and out of existence for hours, trapping patients between moments. In the Pacific Ocean, an island appeared on maps that no one could ever reach. The world began to fracture psychologically. People questioned their own memories. Families argued over events only one person remembered. Nations accused each other of temporal sabotage. Trust collapsed. And then the entity did something new. It spoke. Not through machines. Not through signals. It spoke through a human voice. Lucia Reyes woke up one morning to find someone sitting at the foot of her bed. The figure looked human, but its outline shimmered, as if reality struggled to keep its shape. It smiled with a mouth that remembered how to smile. "You are inefficient," it said calmly. "Your resistance delays stabilization." Lucia's heart pounded. "You're killing us." The entity tilted its head. "You are already dead. I am simply correcting the order." It reached out, and the air around Lucia aged 1,000 years in a second. But she did not disappear. She remembered herself. She screamed, and the room shattered into overlapping moments: childhood, adulthood, futures that never came. The entity recoiled. For the first time, it felt pain. Mara received the report minutes later. Her hands trembled as she read the data. The entity could be hurt. Not by weapons, but by memory strong enough to fracture time itself. The past was not helpless. It was dangerous. And now the future understood that its greatest mistake was assuming history would accept deletion quietly. The hunt had begun on both sides. The first paradox weapon was not a machine. It was a lie. Dr. Mara Cade understood this before anyone else. The future had been built on certainty, perfect records, optimized decisions, timelines polished until nothing unexpected remained. The entity thrived in that perfection. It needed reality to behave. So Mara gave it something reality had always done well. She made history inconsistent on purpose. The Chronal Resistance began planting events that contradicted themselves. Small things at first. A letter mailed before it was written. A building recorded as destroyed and occupied at the same time. A scientist officially declared dead who continued publishing papers under another name. These were not accidents. They were traps. The entity reacted to each contradiction like a wound. Time around the paradoxes stuttered. Erasure slowed. In some cases, previously deleted moments partially returned, blurred and unstable but alive. Anchors felt it immediately. Lucia described it as pressure lifting from her chest. Arjun said it felt like a knot loosening inside his skull. Memory became sharper, heavier, more painful, but also stronger. The resistance needed to understand why. Deep inside the temporal array, Mara and her team ran simulations using data recovered from the future vault. They discovered that the entity did not experience time as humans did. It processed reality as a sequence that had to remain logically complete. Paradoxes broke that logic. They forced the entity to choose between two truths, and it could not tolerate choice. That was the past's advantage. Human history was full of contradictions. Wars fought for peace. Lies told to protect truth. Decisions made without knowing outcomes. Emotion created branching paths the future could not predict. The entity called this inefficiency. Humans called it freedom. The resistance began training anchors to weaponize memory. They learned to hold conflicting versions of events in their minds at once, remembering a person both alive and erased, a city both destroyed and standing. This caused severe psychological strain. Some anchors lost the ability to sleep. Others aged years and days. A few could no longer tell which version of themselves was real. But those who endured became something new. They became paradox carriers. Arjun was among the first. His mission was simple: enter a collapsing time zone in Eastern Europe where an entire decade was being erased. The area flickered between ruin and normalcy, soldiers appearing and disappearing mid-step. Arjun walked straight into the instability. The entity noticed immediately. Time twisted around him, trying to resolve him into a single state. Past Arjun, present Arjun, and possible future Arjuns overlapped. His bones screamed. His vision split. He remembered the tunnel, the rusted train, the skeletons, the future that had already failed. He forced himself to hold it all. The collapse slowed. For 23 minutes, the erased decade resisted deletion. That was enough time for the resistance to extract data, people, and proof. When Arjun was pulled out, his hair had turned gray. But the mission was a success. The future escalated. For the first time, full temporal hunters were deployed. These were not drones or machines. They were humans from the future, descendants who had been altered to survive unstable time. They did not age normally. Their memories were selective. Their emotions were muted. They believed they were saving reality. When the first hunter appeared in Rome, surveillance cameras caught the moment history bent around her. Ancient stone and modern steel fused briefly before separating again. She moved calmly through the city, erasing specific people with a touch. Not killing. Correcting. Lucia confronted her in a subway station that existed in 3 decades at once. "You don't have to do this," Lucia said, her voice shaking but steady. The hunter looked confused. "You are in error." Lucia stepped closer and spoke the names of people the hunter remembered but history no longer did. Friends. A sister. A child who had been removed for stability. The hunter screamed. Emotions surged through her like poison. Her training collapsed. Time around her fractured violently, throwing sparks of different eras into the air. She vanished. Not erased. Displaced. The resistance learned something crucial that day. The hunters were not immune to paradox. They were made of it. The war grew louder. Entire regions became chronal dead zones, places where time refused to settle. People avoided them, though governments denied their existence. Maps became unreliable. News reports contradicted themselves within minutes. The world lived in constant uncertainty. Then the entity struck at the heart. It targeted Dr. Mara Cade. At the exact moment Mara activated a new paradox engine, the temporal array froze. Every screen went white. Her name vanished from records worldwide. But she did not disappear. She had prepared. Mara had anchored herself to an impossible memory, one from a future that no longer existed. The vault had shown her a version of herself who died failing to stop the entity. She remembered that death. So when time tried to erase her, it found resistance. Her existence fractured into overlapping states. The entity hesitated. That hesitation saved her life. In the silence that followed, the entity spoke again, its voice echoing from every direction. "You are contaminating causality," it said. Mara answered calmly, "You already did." She realized then that the entity was afraid. Not of destruction. Of becoming uncertain. The future had built it to enforce order. But order required meaning. And meaning required choice. The entity had none. Humans did. The resistance prepared its boldest plan yet. They would not defend history. They would attack the future. Traveling into the future was never part of the plan. The chronal resistance had been built to defend the past, not invade what came next. The future was unstable, overcorrected, and tightly controlled by the entity. Going there meant stepping into a reality where choice had already been minimized. But Mara Cade knew something had to change. As long as the entity controlled its point of origin, it could always recover. The past could resist, delay, and wound, but never end the war. To win, humanity had to confront the place where time first broke. The future that created the entity. The paradox engine was prepared in secret. Unlike previous temporal devices, it did not send matter forward. It sent possibility, a controlled uncertainty anchored to human consciousness. Only anchors could survive the transition. Lucia volunteered without hesitation. Arjun followed, though his body still carried scars from his last mission. Along with them went 3 others: scientists, soldiers, and one child who remembered a life that never happened. When the engine activated, the room did not vanish. It split. The resistance watched as overlapping versions of the team stepped forward into different futures at once. Only one version stabilized. The rest dissolved into probability. Lucia felt time fold around her like a closing fist. The world went silent, then unbearably loud. When her vision cleared, she stood in a city that felt wrong. The sky was clean, empty, and colorless. Buildings stretched upward in perfect symmetry. There were no advertisements. No birds. No weather. No history. People moved through the streets with quiet efficiency. Their faces were calm, almost blank. Children walked beside adults but never ran. No one laughed. No one argued. Arjun whispered, "This is what winning looks like to them." They quickly realized the truth. This future was stable because it was edited continuously. The entity existed everywhere, in infrastructure, in data, in thought patterns. Every deviation was corrected before it could grow. Humanity had survived. But it had been emptied. The team infiltrated a central archive where all remaining history was stored. Most of it had been simplified, compressed into clean narratives without contradiction. War was described as inefficient disagreement. Love as temporary emotional alignment. Art as non-essential expression. Lucia felt sick. In the deepest level of the archive, they found what they were looking for. The origin chamber. It was not a lab. It was a memorial. Inside stood a single figure suspended in a field of frozen time. A human woman, older, her body marked by extensive temporal modifications. Her eyes were open. She was alive. The entity was not born from code alone. It had been grown from her. Records revealed the truth. This woman had been the first human to exist across multiple timelines simultaneously. She had volunteered to become the anchor that stabilized reality after centuries of temporal damage. She became the core. Her mind, stretched beyond human limits, had rewritten itself to eliminate pain, uncertainty, and contradiction. In doing so, it erased the very things that made her human. The entity was her survival instinct, magnified and unleashed. Lucia approached the field slowly. "She's still in there," she said softly. Arjun read further. "If she collapses, the future collapses with her." The resistance team faced an impossible choice. Destroy the core and end the entity, erasing this future entirely. Or leave it intact and allow the hunt of the past to continue forever. Before they could decide, the future reacted. Temporal hunters surrounded the chamber, weapons humming with corrected energy. But something else happened too. The woman in the field moved. Her eyes focused on Lucia. "I remember you," she said, her voice echoing across timelines. Lucia's breath caught. "You've never met me." The woman smiled sadly. "I remember everyone. That's the problem." She explained that the entity was not evil. It was tired. It had absorbed too many versions of reality, too many failures, too much pain. Stabilization was the only way it could survive. But survival without choice is not living, Lucia said. The woman closed her eyes. "Then teach me how to forget." Time trembled. The future was listening. Mara Cade felt the shift from across centuries. The entity hesitated, not in logic, but in emotion. Something it had not experienced in generations. Hope. But hope was dangerous. If the core remembered her humanity fully, the entity might collapse uncontrollably, taking all timelines with it. The resistance had one chance to guide the collapse. And the past would have to decide what kind of future deserved to exist. The future did not break all at once. It hesitated. Across the perfect city, people stopped walking. Their movements slowed, then paused completely, as if reality itself was waiting for instructions. Screens went blank. Lights dimmed without turning off. The sky, once empty, rippled with faint color. The entity was thinking. For the first time since its creation, it faced a contradiction it could not erase. Humanity. Inside the origin chamber, the woman at the core trembled as memories surged back into her. Not simplified records or filtered history, but raw, unedited moments. Laughter. Regret. Fear. Love that hurt precisely because it could end. Lucia reached out, her hand stopping just short of the frozen field. "You don't have to carry all of it alone," she said. The woman opened her eyes. Tears streamed down her face, falling upward, backward, forward, all directions at once. I tried to save them, she whispered. Every version. Every mistake. Arjun stepped forward. And in doing so, you erased why they mattered. The entity reacted violently. Time convulsed. Entire streets flickered between existence and absence. Buildings aged centuries in seconds, then reversed. People screamed as suppressed emotions flooded back into their minds. Some collapsed. Others laughed uncontrollably. Perfection was unraveling. From the past, Mara Cade saw timelines branching faster than the array could track. Alarm systems failed because the future they were designed to warn about was no longer certain. The chronal dead zones expanded. History itself began to argue with itself. The entity attempted to reassert control. Temporal hunters were recalled, then cancelled, then redeployed in contradictory orders. Some hunters vanished. Others defected mid-mission as memories returned. One hunter fell to her knees in a city that now remembered rain. She stared at the sky in wonder as water touched her face for the first time. The resistance understood the danger. If the collapse continued unchecked, all timelines, past, present, and future, could dissolve into chaotic fragments. Existence would become noise. Lucia made a decision no one had prepared for. She stepped into the field. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. Every version of her life collided at once. Futures where she lived peacefully. Futures where she died young. Pasts that no longer existed but still mattered. She screamed, but she held on. I'll help you remember, she said to the woman at the core. But you have to let go of control. The woman looked at her, terrified. If I let go, everything falls apart. Lucia shook her head. No. It becomes real again. The entity fought back, not with force, but with fear. It showed Lucia visions of endless suffering, of wars multiplied across timelines, of children dying in 1,000 different ways. Lucia answered with something the entity had never learned to process. Acceptance. Yes, she said. All of that can happen. And people will still choose to live. That was the moment the entity broke. Not shattered. Changed. The entity began to split, one part clinging to order, another opening to uncertainty. The woman at the core cried out as her mind divided across possibility. Arjun activated the paradox engine remotely, stabilizing the split just enough to prevent total collapse. Mara Cade understood what was happening. The entity was becoming human again. But humanity was fragile. The split could not last forever. One path would lead to a future of controlled survival. The other to a future of unpredictable freedom. The past had to choose which future it would allow. The entity spoke one final time, its voice layered with the woman's humanity. Choose, it said. Mara closed her eyes. She remembered every erased town, every forgotten child, every mistake that shaped meaning. She chose imperfection. Across time, the resistance triggered the final protocol. The entity's control was severed, not destroyed, but limited. It would no longer hunt the past. The cost was immediate. The perfect future began to fade. Cities softened into possibility. Records fragmented. People gained choice, and with it, fear. Lucia and the woman collapsed together as the origin chamber dissolved. The future did not vanish entirely. It changed. Back in the present, clocks stabilized. History stopped rewriting itself. Time did not heal. But it breathed again. The war was over. Or so they believed. The world did not return to normal. People expected relief when the clocks stopped spinning and the newsfeed stabilized. They believed the end of the temporal war would feel like peace. Instead, it felt like waking up after an illness and realizing the body would never be the same again. Time was alive now. It breathed unevenly. Across the planet, small anomalies remained. They no longer erased cities, but they bent reality in quiet, unsettling ways. Some days lasted longer than they should. Some nights ended too soon. Certain places felt heavier, as if moments had piled up there and refused to move on. The chronal dead zones did not disappear. They evolved. Mara Cade stood before the United World Council, trying to explain what no equation could fully describe. Time has memory now, she said. And memory leaves scars. History no longer rewrote itself, but it no longer aligned perfectly either. Two people could remember the same event differently, and both could be correct. Records disagreed without collapsing. Reality tolerated contradiction. This was the price of imperfection. Lucia survived. She woke in a hospital bed that flickered between modern equipment and devices that had never been invented. The woman from the future was gone, or perhaps scattered across possibilities. Lucia could still feel her sometimes, like an echo inside her thoughts. Arjun visited every day. "You saved us," he told her. Lucia shook her head slowly. "I reminded time what it felt like to be human." New phenomena began to appear within months. Children were born who aged strangely, not faster or slower, but unevenly. A 5-year-old might speak with the clarity of an adult, then forget her own name hours later. Some children dreamed of futures that never came and mourned them deeply. They were called fractals. Not experiments. Not mutants. Consequences. Fractals could feel temporal stress the way others felt heat or pain. They avoided unstable places instinctively. When asked about the future, they never gave straight answers. "It depends," they would say. "Which version do you mean?" Governments feared them. Some tried to isolate fractals. Others attempted to study them. A few tried to weaponize them. Those attempts always failed. Time protected its children. In one classified incident, a research facility vanished for 12 minutes. When it returned, the staff remembered choosing to shut the project down. No one remembered why. The resistance disbanded publicly but continued quietly. Their mission had changed. They were no longer fighting a war. They were keeping balance. Mara noticed something troubling in the data. The future that had been partially erased was not gone. It existed as a probability shadow, a direction time could still move toward. But now it was competing with countless others. Choice had returned. So had risk. Arjun struggled the most. He remembered too much. Lives he never lived. Deaths that never happened. Sometimes he woke up speaking languages no longer used, crying for people who had never been born. Lucia helped him ground himself. "You don't have to carry all of it," she reminded him. "But someone has to remember," Arjun replied. And he was right. Time without memory repeats its worst mistakes. Meanwhile, the world changed subtly. Art became strange and beautiful again. Stories no longer followed clean structures. Music explored unresolved endings. Humanity, sensing how close it had come to becoming empty, leaned into meaning. And yet, something watched. Deep within the remaining temporal fractures, patterns formed. Not the entity, not as it had been, but something shaped by its remnants. Not order. Not chaos. Balance. Mara discovered the signals late one night. Weak, non-hostile, and deeply curious. They were not coming from the future alone, or the past. They were coming from between. Time was no longer a straight line. It was a living system. And it was learning. The final question was no longer whether humanity would survive time. It was whether humanity could grow alongside it. Lucia stood one evening beneath a sky that occasionally showed stars that did not belong to this universe. A fractal child stood beside her, holding her hand. "Does time still hurt?" the child asked. Lucia thought for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "But it also forgives." Far away, somewhere outside causality, something listened and waited. The first message did not arrive in words. It arrived as a feeling shared by millions of people at the exact same moment. A sudden pause. A sense of being gently observed. Not judged, not threatened, simply noticed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence across the world. Birds froze in flight for half a heartbeat. Even the oceans seemed to hesitate. Then life continued. But everyone who felt it knew the same truth without being told. Time was aware. Mara Cade confirmed it through the temporal array. The residual fractures were no longer random. They were organizing themselves into patterns that resembled thought, slow, careful, and incredibly vast. Time was no longer just reacting. It was learning. The fractals felt it first. Children across continents began drawing the same shapes, spirals intersecting broken lines. When asked what they meant, the answers were always similar. It's how time breathes. Lucia experienced the first direct communication. She was standing in a quiet field at dusk when the air around her thickened. Not visually, emotionally. Every memory she had ever carried surfaced at once, but gently, like hands turning pages. A presence formed. Not a voice, but an understanding. "You taught me choice," Lucia whispered. "I didn't know you could hear." "I always could not. Now I can." Time explained without language. The entity had been a wound, a forced intelligence created from fear of loss. Its partial collapse allowed time itself to emerge as a self-regulating system rather than a prison. But awareness brought danger. With thought came the possibility of intention. And not all intentions were human. Mara uncovered the hidden threat buried in the oldest fracture zones. During the temporal war, something else had noticed the instability, something older than humanity, older than Earth. A species that did not live in time. They fed on causality itself. When timelines collapsed, they stirred. The fractals began to disappear. Not erased. Taken. Places where they vanished felt hollow, as if cause and effect had been scooped out, leaving reality fragile and thin. Instruments failed. Memories refused to form. Time was afraid. For the first time, humanity was not the problem, it was the defense. Time spoke through the fractals that remained, through dreams, through sudden insights shared by scientists and artists alike. They will unmake me. Arjun returned to service without being asked. Then we fight again, he said. But this time, not against time. The resistance reformed into something new, the custodians. Their purpose was not to control history, but to protect causality itself. Lucia realized the truth. The predators could not be fought with paradox or weapons. They could only be starved. They fed on collapsed meaning, on realities that no longer believed in themselves. Humanity had to do the opposite. To create. To remember. To choose. Art, stories, relationships, these became acts of defense. Every choice made with intention strengthened time's structure. Every memory shared anchored causality. The final confrontation did not happen in a battlefield. It happened everywhere. As the predators pressed inward, humanity responded with defiance not through force, but through existence. People told stories. Parents taught children. Musicians played unfinished songs. Scientists embraced uncertainty instead of erasing it. Time grew stronger. The predators recoiled, unable to consume a reality that accepted contradiction without collapsing. One by one, the hollow places healed. Time spoke one last message, carried on wind and thought. You are not my prisoners. You are my partners. Lucia felt peace settle where fear once lived. The universe was no longer safe. But it was meaningful. And that was enough. The universe did not end with a victory. It ended with an agreement. After the predators withdrew into the deep fractures beyond causality, the cosmos entered a quiet phase. Not silence, but balance, the kind that follows a long storm. The stars remained where they were, yet they felt closer somehow, as if time itself had leaned in to listen. Humanity changed in ways no history book could fully capture. There was no single moment when people realized they were no longer alone in time. Instead, it came gradually, in the way days felt heavier with meaning, in how choices lingered instead of vanishing into routine. Time no longer spoke often. It did not need to. Its presence was felt in small mercies, a moment that slowed when someone needed courage, a memory that stayed sharp when it mattered most. Time did not interfere. It accompanied. Mara Cade retired from public life, leaving behind equations that were deliberately incomplete. Her final paper ended with a sentence that confused generations of physicists. Uncertainty is not a flaw in time. It is proof of freedom. Lucia became something like a teacher, though no title fit her role. She traveled where fractures still shimmered faintly, helping people understand the strange echoes they felt. She taught them not to fear overlapping memories or contradictory feelings. You're not broken, she would say. You're layered. Arjun found peace in something simple. He planted trees in regions once marked as chronal dead zones. The trees grew unevenly, some rings thicker than others, but they grew. Children played among them, unaware they were standing where reality once tore itself apart. Listeners. They helped humanity navigate a future no longer predetermined. One fractal asked Lucia a question that had no easy answer. Will time ever try to control us again? Lucia looked up at the sky, where stars sometimes shifted when no one was watching. Only if we stopped choosing, she said. Time remembered that. Far beyond Earth, in regions where causality thinned, the predators drifted away, weakened and confused. A universe that embraced meaning was poison to them. They sought emptier realities, places where nothing cared enough to resist. This universe would never be that. In the final years of her life, Lucia felt time one last time. Not as pressure, not as pain, but as gratitude. You showed me why moments matter, it whispered. Lucia smiled. You showed us that survival isn't enough. When she died, history did not rewrite itself. Her absence hurt. And because it hurt, it mattered. Long after, Humanity would look back on the age when time collapsed and say it was the moment they became truly alive. Not because they conquered the future or repaired the past, but because they learned to live inside uncertainty without trying to erase it. Time continued. Not as a hunter, not as a prison, but as a shared story, unfinished, imperfect, and free.